Hi readers, welcome back to Reads with Rune B. Today's chapter is The Lion and the Unicorn. And here is Alice in the woods with the White King. It looks like soldiers preparing for a battle in the background there. The next moment, the soldiers came running through the wood, at first in 2s and 3s, and then 10 or 20 together. And at last, in such crowds, they seemed to fill the whole forest. Alice got behind a tree for fear of being run over, and watched them go by. She thought in all her life she had never seen so many soldiers so uncertain on their feet. They were always tripping over or falling over something. And when one went down, several more always fell over him, so that the ground was soon covered in heaps of little men. And then came the horses. Having 4 feet, these managed rather better than the foot soldiers. But even they stumbled now and again, and it seemed to be a regular rule that whenever a horse stumbled, the rider fell off instantly. The confusion got worse every moment, and Alice was very glad to get out of the wood and into an open place, where she found the White King seated on the ground, busily writing in his memorandum book. "I've sent them all," cried the king in a tone of delight, on seeing Alice. "Did you meet any soldiers, my dear, as you came through the wood?" "I did," Alice said. "Several thousand, I should think." 4,207. That's the exact number," said the king, referring to his book. "I couldn't send all the horses, you know, because 2 of them were wanted in the game. And I haven't sent 2 messengers either. They're both gone to town. Just look along the road and tell me if you can see either of them." "I see nobody on the road," said Alice. "Only I wish I had such eyes," the king remarked in a fretful tone, "to be able to see nobody. And at that distance too. Why, it's as much as I can do to see real people by this light." All this was lost on Alice, who was looking quite intently along the road, shading her eyes with one hand. "Oh, I see someone now," she exclaimed at last, "but he's coming very slowly. What a curious attitude he goes into." For the messenger kept skipping up and down and wriggling like an eel as he came along, with his great hands spread out like fans on each side. "Not at all," said the king. "He's an Anglo-Saxon messenger, and all those are Anglo-Saxon attitudes." Dear me, reader, I am stuffed up today. "He only does them when he's happy. His name is Hyaga." He pronounced it to rhyme with mare. "I love my love with an H," Alice couldn't help begin, "because he is happy. I hate him with an H, because he is hideous. I fed him with ham sandwiches and hay. His name is Haga, and he lives on the hill," the king remarked simply, without the least idea that he was joining in the game. Well, Alice was still hesitating for the name of the town beginning with an H. The other messengers called Hatta. I have 2, you know, to come and go. 1 to come and 1 to go." "I beg your pardon," said Alice. "It isn't respectable to beg," said the king. "I only meant I didn't understand," said Alice. "Why have you got 1 to come and 1 to go?" "Don't I tell you?" the king repeated impatiently. "I must have 2 to fetch and carry. 1 to fetch and one to carry. At this moment the messenger arrived, and he was far too much out of breath to say a word, and could only wave his hands about and make fearful faces at the poor king. "This young lady loves you with an H," the king said, introducing Alice in hope of turning the messenger's attention off from himself. But it was no use. The Anglo-Saxon attitude only got more extraordinary by every moment, and with the great roll of his eyes... let me start that again. "This young lady loves you with an H," the king said, introducing Alice in hope of turning off the messenger's attention from himself. But it was no use. The Anglo-Saxon attitudes only got more extraordinary every moment, while the great eyes rolled wildly from side to side. "You alarm me," said the king. "I feel faint. Give me a ham sandwich." On which the messenger, to Alice's great amusement, opened a bag that hung around his neck and handed the king a sandwich, who devoured it greedily. "Another sandwich," said the king. "There's nothing left but hay now," said the messenger, peeping in the bag. "Hay, then," the king murmured in a faint whisper, and Alice was glad to see him revived a good deal. "There's nothing like eating hay when you're feeling faint," he remarked to her, as he munched away. "I should think throwing cold water over you would be much better," Alice suggested, "or some sal volatile." I didn't say there was nothing better," the king replied. "I said that there was nothing like it," which Alice did not venture to deny. "Who did you pass on the road?" the king went on, holding out his hand to the messenger for some more hay. "Nobody," said the messenger. "Quite right," said the king. This young lady saw him too, so of course nobody walks slower than you." And there is the king eating his hay, Alice, and the messenger, whose name apparently rhymes with mare. "I do my best," said the messenger said in a sullen tone. "I'm sure nobody walks much faster than I do." "He can't do that," said the king, "or else he'd have been here first. However, now you've got your breath, you may tell us what happened in town." "I'll whisper it," the messenger said, putting his hands over his mouth in the shape of a trumpet, and stooping to get close to the king's ear. Alice was sorry for this, for she wanted to hear the news too. However, instead of whispering, he simply shouted out the top of his voice, "They're at it again!" "Do you call that a whisper?" cried the poor king, jumping up and shaking himself. You do such a thing again, I'll have you buttered. It went through me and my head like an earthquake." "It would be a very tiny earthquake," thought Alice. "Who are at it again?" she ventured to ask. "Why, the lion and the unicorn, of course," said the king. "Fighting for the crown?" "Yes, to be sure," said the king. "And the best of the joke is that it's my crown all the while. Let's run and see them." And they trotted off, and Alice repeating to herself the old words of the song. The lion and the unicorn were fighting for the crown. The lion beat the unicorn all around the town. Some gave them white bread, some gave them brown. Some gave them plum cake and drummed them out of town. "Does the one that wins get the crown?" she asked, as well as she could, for the running that she was doing put her quite out of breath. "Dear me, no," said the king. "What an idea! Would you be good enough," Alice panted out, after running a little further, "to stop for a minute, just to get one's breath again?" "I'm good," said the king. "Not only am I Only I'm not strong enough, you see. A minute goes by so fearfully quick. You might as well try to stop the Bandersnatch. Alice had no more breath for talking, so they trotted on in silence. Till they came in sight of a great crowd, and in the middle of which the Lion and the Unicorn were indeed fighting. They were in such a cloud of dust that at first Alice could not make out which was which, but she soon managed to distinguish the Unicorn by his horn. They placed themselves close to where Hatta, the other messenger, was standing watching the fight, with a cup of tea in one hand and a slice of bread and butter in the other. And here, when the light goes better, we have the Lion and the Unicorn fighting. He's only just out of prison, and he hadn't finished his tea when he was sent in, Helga whispered to Alice. They only gave him oyster shells in there, so you see he's very hungry and very thirsty. How are you, dear child? He went on, putting his arms affectionately around Hatch's neck. Hatta looked round and nodded and went on with his bread and butter. Were you happy in prison, dear child? said Helga. Hatta looked around once more, and this time a tear or two rolled down his cheek, but not a word would he speak. Speak, can't you? Helga cried impatiently. But Hatta only munched away and drank some more tea. Speak, won't you? Cried the king. How are they getting on with the fight? Hatta made a desperate effort and swallowed a large piece of bread and butter. They're getting on very well, he said in a choking voice. Each one of them have been down about 87 times, I think. Then I suppose I should soon bring in the white bread and the brown? I'm waiting for them, said Hatta. This is a bit of it, as I'm eating. Just then there was a pause in the fight, and the Lion and the Unicorn sat down, panting, while the king called out, 10 minutes to allow for refreshments. Hatta and Helga sat to work, all at once, carrying around trays of white bread and brown. Alice took a piece to taste, but it was very dry. I don't think they'll do any more fighting today, the king said to Hatta. Go and order the drums to begin. And Hatta went bounding away like a grasshopper. For a minute or two, Alice stood silent, watching, and then suddenly she brightened up. Look! There's the White Queen! She came flying out of the wood over yonder. How fast those queens can run! There's some enemy after her, no doubt, the king said, without looking round. That wood's... Excuse me, dear readers. That wood's full of them. But are you going to run and help her? Alice asked, very much surprised at him taking it so quietly. No use, said the king. She runs so fearfully quick. She might as well try and catch the Bandersnatch. But I'll make a memorandum about her, if you like. She's a dear, a good creature, he repeated softly to himself, and opened his memorandum book. Do you spell creature with a double E? At this moment, the Unicorn sauntered by them, with his hands in his pockets. I had the best of it this time, he said to the king, glancing at him as he passed. Yes, a little, the king replied rather nervously. You shouldn't have run him through with your horn, you know. It didn't hurt him, the Unicorn said carelessly. And he was going on with his eye when his eye happened to fall upon Alice, and he turned round instantly and stood for some time looking at her with the deepest air of disgust. What is this? He said at last. This is a child, replied Hega eagerly, coming in front of Alice to introduce her and spreading out both his hands towards her in an Anglo-Saxon attitude. We found it today. It is as large as life and twice as natural. I always thought they were fabulous monsters, said the unicorn. Is it alive? It can talk, Hega said sullenly. The unicorn looked dreamily at Alice and said, Talk, child. Alice could not help but curling her lips up into a smile as she began. Do you know, I always thought unicorns were fabulous monsters, too. I never saw a live one before. Well, now that you have, and we have seen one another, the unicorn said, if you believe in me, I will believe in you. Is that a bargain? Yes, if you like, said Alice. Come out and fetch the plum cake, old man. The unicorn went on, turning from her to the king. None of your brown bread for me. Certainly, the king muttered, and beckoned to Hega to begin. Open the bag, he whispered. Quick, not that one, it's full of hay. Hega took out a large cake and gave it to Alice to hold, while he got out the dish and the carving knife. How they all came out of it, Alice couldn't quite guess. It was quite a small bag. She guessed it worked something like a conjuring trick. The lion had joined them in this. While going on, he looked very. The lion had joined them while all of this was going on. He looked very sleepy and tired, and his eyes were half shut. What's this? He said, blinking lazily at Alice and speaking in a deep, hollow tone that sounded like that of a great bell tolling. Ah, what is it now? The unicorn cried eagerly. You'll never guess. I couldn't. The lion looked at Alice wearily. Are you animal, vegetable, or mineral? He said, yawning with every other word. It's a fabulous monster! The unicorn cried out eagerly before Alice could reply. Hand round the plum cake, monster, the lion said, laying down and putting his chin on his paws. Sit down, both of you. To the king and the unicorn. Fair play with the cake, you know. The king was evidently very uncomfortable at having to sit down between the two creatures, but there was no other place for him. What a fight we might have for your crown now, said the unicorn, looking shyly up at the crown, which the poor king was nearly shaking, who was shaking so hard that it nearly fell off his head. And here is Alice cutting the cake for everyone. Oh, sorry. I'm trying to get it so you can see it, but I keep forgetting that you. There we go. I should win easily, the lion said. I'm not sure of that, said the unicorn. Why, I beat you all around the town, you chicken, the lion replied angrily, half getting up as he spoke. The king interrupted in order to prevent the quarrel from going on, but he was so very nervous, and his voice quite quivered. All around the town, he said. That's a good long way. Did you go by the old bridge or the marketplace? You'll get the best view from the old bridge. I'm sure I don't know, the lion growled out, laying on the ground. There was too much dust to see anything. What a time the monster is having cutting up that cake. Alice seated herself on the bank of the little brook with the great dish on her knees. and was sawing away diligently with a knife. "It's very provoking," she said, in reply to the lion, as she was getting quite upset at being called a monster. "I've cut several slices already, but they always join round again." "Don't you know how to manage a looking-glass cake?" the unicorn remarked. "Hand it round first, and cut it afterwards." This sounded like absolute nonsense, but Alice very obediently got up and carried the dishes round, and the cake divided itself into 3 pieces as she did so. "Now cut it up," the lion said, as she returned to her place with the empty dish. "I say, this isn't fair," cried the unicorn, as Alice sat with a knife in her hand, very much puzzled as to how to begin. "The monster has given the lion twice as much as me, and she's kept none for herself anyhow. Do you like plum cake, monster?" Now, before Alice could answer him, the drums began again. Where this noise came from she couldn't make out, but the air seemed full of it, and rang through her head until she felt quite deafened. And here is Alice with all the drums. She sprang to her feet and raced across the little brook in terror, and just in time to see the lion and the unicorn rise to their feet with their angry looks at being interrupted in their feast, before she dropped to her knees and put her hands over her ears, vainly trying to shut out the dreadful uproar. "If that doesn't drum them out of town," she thought, "nothing ever will." And that is the end of our chapter. Till next time, readers, keep reading.